Before we jumped in, just a quick shout out to our sponsor, Velocity Classes. Their motto is fly your own way. Hello and welcome. Today, we are going way back. I mean, way, way back. We're going to dig into the history of work itself to figure out what the world's oldest jobs really are. So, let's kick things off with a huge question. I mean, think about it. If you strip everything away, no technology, no society as we know it, no money, what was the very first job a human ever did? What was the original 9 to 5? Well, to even start answering that, we've got to figure out what a job actually is. Okay, let's break this down. At its absolute core, a job is what we call an economic activity. And all that really means is any human action that generates some kind of income. But, we're not talking about money here. Back then, income meant food, shelter, stuff you needed to live. It was literally the act of doing something just to survive. So from that big, broad idea, we can zoom in on the very first category. And these are called primary activities. These are the jobs that are all about taking stuff directly from the natural world. Yeah, it's pretty much humanity's most basic interaction with the planet, all for the sake of survival. And here are some great examples of what we're talking about. We've got hunting and gathering, of course, but also things like mining, farming, and fishing. So you're talking about everything from chasing down an animal to pulling fish from a river or, later on farming the land. They all seem different, but they have one huge thing in common. And that common thread? It's that they all depend directly on the Earth's resources. I mean, you need lands to farm, water for fish, plants for gathering, and so on. See, these jobs aren't about making something out of other products. Nope, they are the absolute starting line for the entire economic chain. There's actually a really cool term for the people who do this kind of work, red-collar workers. And the name comes from exactly what you'd think. It's all about the outdoor nature of the job, working out under the sun. Kind of paints a vivid picture, right? So this brings us right back to our big question. We found our answer. The world's oldest occupations, they fall right into this primary activity bucket. And they are, of course, hunting and gathering. This was it. This was humanity's original way of making a living. Now, when you look at them side by side like this, you can really see they're like two sides of the same survival coin. Both were absolutely crucial, especially in tough climates where you just couldn't farm. But they worked pretty differently. Hunting, well, that meant you had to cover huge areas of land. Gathering, on the other hand, was much more local. And here's the key thing. Neither one created a surplus. You didn't have leftovers. You basically lived day to day. And that's a big reason why early human groups had to be small and constantly on the move. And that simplicity, it carries right over to the tools they used. I mean, technology wasn't some complex machine. It was a sharp stick, a carefully broken stone, maybe a basket woven from reeds. The real investment wasn't money, it was knowledge. Deep knowledge passed down through generations about the land, the seasons, and the animals. We're talking pure subsistence living. Now, because it's so basic, gathering has sometimes been called the lowest human occupation. And look, I know that sounds really harsh, but it's not a judgment of the people themselves. It's more about where it sits on the economic ladder. It's the absolute foundation, the very first rung, the layer that uses the least amount of technology and creates zero surplus. It's the baseline for what we call work. But get this. Don't for a second think we're just talking about ancient history here. This is still happening. Traditional gathering is practiced today in some really specific parts of the world. You'll find it in super cold places, these high latitude zones like northern Canada, but also in really hot tropical low latitude zones like the Amazon basin and parts of Southeast Asia. So that naturally leads you to wonder, right? If these are the oldest jobs in the world, are they just going to fade away as everything gets more modern? Are hunting and gathering basically just museum pieces at this point? Well, the answer is actually a really fascinating no. Gathering is evolving. It's not just about surviving until tomorrow anymore. Like this quote says, some of it has become totally commercial. I mean, think about people who forage for gourmet mushrooms for fancy restaurants or find medicinal herbs that get sold all over the world. The world's oldest job is actually finding a new niche in our modern economy. How cool is that? And, that really leaves us with something to think about. As our world keeps changing and we face all these new, huge challenges, it really makes you wonder, which of these ancient skills, these fundamental skills of survival and knowing the land from the very dawn of humanity, which ones are we going to need to rediscover to build our future? It seems like what's old could very well be new again.
pastoralism. We're going to see how this one big idea actually split into two completely different ways of life, one ancient and one very, very modern.
So, to really get this, let's start with a huge question. For most of human history, we were on the move, right? We were hunters and gatherers. So, why did that stop? What made us change a strategy that had worked for so long?
You know, the answer's pretty simple. It came down to survival. At some point, chasing your next meal just wasn't a sure thing anymore. It was way too risky. So our ancestors did something brilliant. They totally flipped the script. Instead of finding their food, they decided to grow it. And that all started with domesticating animals.
And that new strategy, well, that's what we call pastoralism. The main idea here is pretty straightforward. Instead of hunting animals one by one, humans started raising entire herds of them. It became this whole economic system built around sheep, goats, and cattle, getting everything you could from them, like meat, milk, wool, even their hides.
Okay, but here's where things get really interesting. This idea of raising animals didn't just stay as one thing. It actually forked into two completely different paths, and we're going to break both of them down for you. First, the ancient way, which is nomadic herding, and second, the modern model, commercial ranching.
So first up, let's dive into that original blueprint, nomadic herding. This is a life that is truly defined by movement. It's a non-stop journey that's all about following the needs of your herd and the rhythm of the seasons.
So what does this life actually look like? Well, for one thing, it's not about making money. It's a subsistence activity, meaning you're doing it to survive, to feed your family. The animals just eat whatever grows naturally. The methods used are pretty traditional, passed down for generations, and the whole thing requires huge, huge areas of land to work.
Now, you might think they're just wandering around, but this movement is anything but random. It's a really smart cyclical pattern, and it has a specific name: transhumance. Basically, it's the scheduled, seasonal migration of the herds to find the best pastures.
This whole lifestyle follows the seasons, kind of like a two-step dance that repeats every year. In the summer, the herders guide their animals up into the mountains where it's cooler and there's fresh grass. And then, when winter starts to creep in, they head back down to the warmer plains. It's a cycle that's gone on for centuries.
And hey, don't think for a second this is just something out of a history book. This is a living, breathing culture. Take the Himalayas, for example. Groups like the Gujars, the Buckerwalls, and the Gadis still live this way today. They follow the same ancient routes their ancestors did.
And it's not just in the Himalayas. You find this way of life all over the globe, usually in specific climates. The main hotspot stretches all the way from North Africa, across the Arabian Peninsula, and into Mongolia. But you also see it way up in the tundra of Eurasia, and even down in parts of Southwest Africa and Madagascar.
Okay, now we're going to do a complete 180. We're leaving that ancient world behind and jumping straight into the modern one. We're going from a life of constant motion to something totally different, a calculated global business called commercial ranching. The whole philosophy here is flipped on its head. Instead of people moving with the animals are kept in one single spot, a huge, permanent farm we call a ranch. And they're super specialized. Usually, they raise just one type of animal, and that's it.
Yeah, this is a completely different kind of operation. For starters, it's capital intensive. It takes a ton of cash to get this going. Everything is systematic and scientific. And there's one primary goal: get the highest yield possible so you can sell the product on the global market.
And the engine that powers all of this? It's science. We're talking about things like genetic improvement to breed bigger, better animals, advanced medicine to control diseases, and even complex technology like refrigeration so that meat and other products can be shipped all around the world.
So we've got these two completely different worlds, right? Both are about raising animals, but they couldn't be more opposite. Let's put them side by side to really drive home the contrast in this tale of two herds. The difference is just wow. On one hand, you have a life of constant movement, using natural methods, all focused on survival, a practice that's really rooted in the ancient world. And on the other hand, you've got a fixed location, scientific management, and a focus on pure profit, a system built for today's global economy. So all this contrast begs a really important question. In our world, which is so dominated by this modern model, what's happening to the ancient way of life? Let's take a look at the shrinking horizon for these nomadic cultures. The hard truth is, it's not looking good. All across the globe, the number of people who live as pastoral nomads is dropping. And just as critical, the vast territories they need to survive,
That land is literally shrinking out from under them, year after year.
So why is this happening? Well, it really boils down to two big forces of the modern world. First, political borders. You can't follow a migration route that's 1,000 years old if someone puts up a national fence right in the middle of it. And second, governments in many countries are actively pushing settlement plans, trying to get nomads to give up their mobile lifestyle and settle down in one place.
And that's really what brings us to our final thought here, and a question I want to leave you with. You see, these two ways of life are more than just different economic plans. They're two different ways of seeing the world, each with its own incredible, unique knowledge tied to the land. So, when an ancient way of life like nomadic herding vanishes, what is it that we're actually losing?
We're talking about something that's the literal bedrock of civilization, agriculture. I mean, from a single seed to the supermarket down the street, we're about to unpack the incredible, complex systems we've built just to feed ourselves.
All right, so here's what we've got lined up. We're going to start with the absolute basics, then dive into the two big paths, farming just to survive and farming for the market. After that, we'll look at some really cool modern specializations and finish up with how farmers team up to get the job done.
Okay, first things first, let's get grounded. No pun intended. What even is agriculture, really? And how did it become, the foundation for basically everything?
You know, the word itself kind of tells the whole story. It comes from the Latin ager, meaning soil, and culture, for cultivation. So at its core, it's just working the soil, raising crops, rearing animals. But that simple act? Whoa, it was absolutely revolutionary. It's the reason we stopped wandering around as hunter-gatherers and could actually settle down and start building, well, everything.
And the scale of its importance today? It's just staggering. I mean, get this. 71% of all the world's food needs are met by agriculture. And for huge parts of the globe, especially in developing countries, it's not just about what's for dinner. It's the main way people make a living. It's the engine driving the whole economy.
Okay, so when you look at all this massive global activity, it really boils down to two big ideas, two main paths. On one hand, you've got subsistence farming. That's basically farming to live, to feed yourself and your family. And on the other hand, commercial agriculture. That's farming to sell. It's a business, plain as simple.
So let's go down that first path, right? Farming to survive. We're going to take a look at how people do it, starting with some of the oldest methods out there.
But here's the thing. Even inside this whole farming to survive world, there's a really important split. You've got what we call primitive subsistence. Think small patches of land, super basic tools like a hoe, family doing all the work, and you're totally dependent on what nature gives you. Then there's intensive subsistence, and that's a whole different beast. This is all about necessity, It's about squeezing every single bit of production out of a tiny plot of land, usually because there are just too many people to feed.
So that primitive style we mentioned, it often goes by the name shifting cultivation, but you've probably heard its more famous name, slash and burn. And the process is, well, it's pretty brilliant actually. First, you clear a patch of land. Then, you burn all that vegetation. The ash from the fire mixes into the soil and acts like a natural fertilizer. Then you grow your crops, and when the soil gets tired out, you just move on. You let that patch go back to nature and start the cycle all over again somewhere else.
And what's so cool is that this is not some isolated thing. It's a truly global technique, just with different names everywhere you go. In northeastern India, they call it juming. In Mexico, it's milpa. Ladang in Indonesia and Malaysia, roca in Brazil. It's the same smart idea, just adapted by people all over the planet.
Okay, so now let's flip back to intensive subsistence farming. Remember? This is a totally different story. It's not about moving with nature, it's really a battle against limitations. Think about places in monsoon Asia, where there are tons of people, but not a lot of land. The whole game is about getting the absolute maximum amount of food from every single square foot. And that often means just incredibly hard, backbreaking work.
All right, let's switch gears completely. We're leaving farming to survive behind and jumping onto that second big path, farming to sell. Welcome to commercial agriculture. Here, the farm isn't just a farm. It's more like a factory, and the number one goal, profit.
And a perfect example of this is plantation agriculture. I want you to picture these huge estates, just massive farms, growing only one single crop. We're talking tea, coffee, rubber, sugarcane, you name it.
And this whole system really goes back to the colonial era. It was set up by Europeans to get a steady supply of all those tropical crops they couldn't grow back home.
And you can see these direct historical lines right here. France was all about cocoa and coffee in West Africa. For Britain, it was tea in India, rubber in Malaysia. Spain wanted coconut and sugarcane from the Philippines. The point is, the global trade for these things we enjoy every day, it was built on this colonial plantation system. It literally reshaped the entire world economy.
Now, on the complete other end of the commercial farming spectrum, you've got extensive commercial grain cultivation. And this is the polar opposite of that intensive, high-labor farming we talked about earlier. Here, the formula is totally different. Huge, vast landscapes, massive machines doing all the work, and actually, very few people.
These are the great breadbaskets of the world. You've got the steppes in Eurasia, the prairies in North America, the pampas down in Argentina, the velds in South Africa, and the downs in Australia. These huge grasslands are basically the world's wheat factories, churning out grain to feed billions of us.
So, we've covered the two big buckets, right? Subsistence and commercial. But of course, modern agriculture is way more complex than just that. It's evolved into all these super specialized, market-focused hybrids. Let's check a few of them out.
Just look at the variety here. You have mixed farming, which is this really smart system of raising both crops and animals together. Then there's dairy farming, which is all about efficiently getting fresh milk to people in the cities. And then you get into these hyper-specialized areas, like Mediterranean agriculture. That's where we get all those amazing citrus fruits and olives, and of course grapes for wine. The whole business of grape cultivation even has its own name, viticulture.
And this one, truck farming, is, well, the name tells you everything you need to know. The whole idea is based on a simple question. Can you get it from the farm to the city market in a single overnight truck journey? That's it. It's a whole type of farming that's built around the logistics of a truck.
Okay, for our last section, let's make one final shift in perspective. We're going to stop looking at what people are farming and instead look at how they organize themselves to do the farming.
And surprise, surprise, we see two main models here too. First, you have cooperative farming. This is where farmers voluntarily team up. They might pool their money to buy seeds in bulk or sell their produce together, but, and this is key, they still own their individual farms. Then you have collective farming. This is way more all in. Farmers pool everything, their land, their animals, their labor. The ownership is with the group, and everybody gets a share of what's produced.
And these aren't just abstract ideas. They've played out in a big way in history. The cooperative movement, for example, has been a massive success story in Western Europe, especially in a place like Denmark, where pretty much every single farmer is part of a co-op. The collective model, on the other hand, well, that's probably most famous for the kolkhoz system in the Soviet Union, which was a very different story. There, peasants were actually forced to give up their land and join these huge, state-controlled collective farms starting back in 1929.
So there you have it. From a simple digging stick in a forest clearing to a complex global supply chain, agriculture is just this incredibly diverse world. It shaped our entire past, and it absolutely defines our present. And that leaves us with one last, really big question to think about. As our population keeps growing and our planet keeps changing, which of these models, or maybe some new hybrid we haven't even thought of yet, is going to be the one that feeds our future? All right, let's talk about something that is quite literally all around us, but almost completely invisible: mining. It's this massive global industry that builds our world, but it operates totally out of sight. Yet its products are in everything we touch, every single day. So, let's dig in. Seriously, just take a second and look around you, wherever you are right now. The phone or computer you're watching this on, the glass in your window, the metal in your chair, the wires in the walls. If it didn't grow out of the ground, it had to be dug out of the ground. That is the hidden foundation of our entire civilization. So, what exactly is mining? Well, at its very core, it's an economic activity. It's all about pulling commercially valuable minerals from the earth. And that word, valuable, that's the key to everything. This isn't just about digging for fun. It's about digging for profit. And you know, this whole idea is not new. Not at all. In fact, mining is so fundamental to who we are that we literally name huge chunks of human history after the minerals we figured out how to use. Think about it. The Copper Age, the Bronze Age, the Iron Age, our ability to mine has defined our progress from the very beginning.
But then the Industrial Revolution hit, and everything just exploded.
All of a sudden, the world had this insatiable appetite for coal and iron to power the factories and build the modern world. And that hunger for minerals, it has only gotten stronger and stronger ever since.
So that brings up a huge question, right? There are mineral deposits all over the planet. How on earth does a company decide where to even start digging? Well, it is definitely not a guess. It's a high-stakes puzzle of profitability that has to be solved before anything else happens.
This is it. This is the one question that drives the entire industry. Before a single shovel hits the dirt, before a single dollar is spent on equipment, companies have to be as sure as they possibly can be that this venture is actually going to make money.
And to get that answer, they have to do this big balancing act between two totally different things. You've got the physical reality of the minerals in the ground, and then you've got the cold, hard economic reality of the market. Let's look at both sides of that scale.
Okay, first, the physical stuff, the geology. How much stuff is actually down there? What's the grade, which is kind of like its purity? Are we talking high-quality ore, or is it mixed with a bunch of worthless rock? Is it all in one spot, or is it spread out? And a really big one, how far is it from the people who are going to buy it?
Then, you've got the whole other side of the puzzle, the economics. Does anybody even want this mineral right now? Do we have the tech to get it out of the ground without breaking the bank? Can we raise the millions, sometimes billions, needed for all the infrastructure? And what about the day-to-day costs of labor and transportation? Because here's the deal. A giant pile of pure gold is totally worthless if it costs more to get it out of the ground than the gold itself is actually worth.
All right, so let's say a company does the math. They weigh the physical against the economic, and it looks like a go. The project is profitable. Now comes the next big challenge. How do you actually get the minerals out? Mining isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. You got to pick the right tool for the right job. Generally speaking, that toolkit has four main methods. You've got open cast mining, shaft mining, drilling, and quarrying. Let's break down what each one is and when you'd use it.
First up, open cast mining. You might also hear this called open pit mining. This is what you do when the valuable stuff is pretty close to the surface. You literally just remove the top layer of earth to get at the ore below, and then you bring in these enormous machines to just scoop it all out. It's kind of like taking the lid off a giant treasure chest buried in the ground.
And there's a really good reason this method is so common. When it's an option, it is usually the easiest and cheapest way to get the job done. It lets you extract massive amounts of material and fast. It's all about speed and scale.
But what if the good stuff is buried deep underground? Well, that's when you have to turn to shaft mining. This is a whole different ballgame. It means digging these super deep vertical tunnels, or shafts, and then spreading out in horizontal tunnels to follow the veins of things like coal, iron, or even diamonds.
And down there, it's a completely different world. It takes this whole underground city of technology to make it work. Special elevators to get workers and equipment down, heavy-duty drills to cut through rock, underground trucks, and maybe most important of all, huge ventilation systems just to make sure there's breathable air.
And that brings us to a really stark and unavoidable truth. The source material we're looking at puts it very bluntly. This method is risky. And it is. Down there, miners are facing constant threats. Poisonous gases, fires, floods, and caving in lead to fatal accidents. It's incredibly dangerous work.
The last two methods are a bit more specialized. You've got drilling, which is what we use for stuff we can't just scoop up. Liquids and gases. So think oil and natural gas, where we have to bore these really deep, precise holes to tap into them. And then you have quarrying. This looks a lot like open cast mining, but it's usually for things like stone, sand, and gravel, building materials that are right on the surface. It's really the simplest form of mining there is.
So now that we've covered the how, let's zoom out and look at the where. Because right now, the global map of mining is going through this massive shift, this huge economic transformation that is reshaping entire countries.
On one side of this big shift, you have developed countries, and they're stepping back from the really hands-on parts of mining, the digging, the processing. And the biggest reason why? It really comes down to high labor costs. It's just become too expensive for them to stay competitive.
And so, as they pull back, developing nations are stepping right in to fill that gap. Countries that have large workforces and lower operating costs are becoming absolutely critical to the world's supply of minerals.
And when I say critical, I mean it. The dependency here is just staggering. For a number of countries across Africa, South America, and Asia, mining isn't just part of their economy. It accounts for more than half of their entire national income, over 50%. It's everything.
So when you pull it all together, from the very first stone tools all the way to the silicon in our smartphones, mining has been the literal engine of human progress. It built our past, it is building our present, and that total reliance on it brings us to one last really critical question about our future.
Our world is built, piece by piece, from things we take out of the earth. And as our technology gets more complex and our demand for those materials just keeps growing, we're left with this one unavoidable question. As we keep digging to build the world of tomorrow, what is the true cost, environmentally, economically, and to human lives? Thank you for watching, and remember, fly your own way.